Well, we're here straight after the Mexican F1 Grand Prix. I'm Jon Jackson, host of talkSPORT's motorsport show On Track. You can get that on your podcast apps, and new episodes drop on the radio every Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. on talkSPORT 2. My guest this weekend, because we are in the middle of this North and South America triple header, is Todd McCandless from the Parc Fermé podcast and also from the website as well. Todd, great to chat to you on this first episode of our sort of post-race debrief. It's been quite an interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has. First of all, thanks for having me on the show, John. Really appreciate it. It's an honor to be with you. Yeah, it's really been an exciting weekend. And who thought we'd come into the last half of the season, that big fight between Red Bull, McLaren. Of course, everybody's excited about it. But out of nowhere, Ferrari seemed to have shown up to the last part of this season. And they're giving McLaren a real run for the money in the Constructors' Championship. And that's where all the money is made. So, yeah, it's turned into a very exciting final few races.
It feels like, well, we've had big distractions, and mainly that is the battle between Lando and Max, basically on the track when it comes to race incidents and off the track when it comes to the title race. It feels like Ferrari have been allowed to go under the radar, and they've had a lot of stick recently, haven't they, about strategy and getting things slightly wrong when they've put themselves in good positions. And it seems like now that something's clicked and actually they're following through when they're in these winning positions. And also they've got things together with the car, and when it comes to strategy, they're just nailing it every single time. So if we look back at the US Grand Prix there, we have a Ferrari winner while all of us are talking about this main incident between Lando and Max Verstappen. What was it you said about that incident at the time? Did you agree that there should have been a penalty handed down to Lando after he gained an advantage off the track?
Yeah, it's always, these are huge talking points, of course, and it's a contentious point. The reality of it is that the longer the Formula One regulations are stable, the closer cars get in competitiveness, and that's what we're seeing this year. Because of that, they're going to be really, going at it hammer and tongs. And there's 20 drivers that are always going to dive for the apex. There's 20 drivers that's always going to push somebody out wide, and this is nothing new in Formula One. It's been going on for decades, right? But in that moment, it was, well, he pushed him out wide. That certainly did happen. Lando had ran afoul of track limit violations, which garnered the penalty. It's a tough call. McLaren actually did try to really contest that decision this weekend in Mexico. The stewards really deemed it as Max was not the passer, and they disallowed the arbitration of that, or the re-arbitration of that penalty. So that's the way it went down. But if you were upset at that, certainly a week ago in Austin, you're a Lando Norris fan, and who isn't, then you were looking for that penalty. Then we head into Mexico, and certainly a host of penalties came his way, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to stop you actually briefly. As an American, which teams do you support? Are you supporting Haas every time, or is it not quite as loyal to your country?
Yeah, no. Everyone that listens to our podcast know I'm a lifelong Ferrari fan. The picture back would give it away, but yeah, I've always been a Ferrari fan. I've suffered through all the Ferrari doldrums for years, so it's not easy being Tifosi, but it always is. But I actually approach this with a pretty non-biased. Even though I'm a Ferrari fan, I think I've been the most critical of Ferrari. So yeah, but the American audience pretty split. Certainly, it all comes down to initial brand. They certainly know Ferrari. Ferrari is one of the biggest brands in the entire world. Certainly Mercedes is big. Those big names are always good. So the fan base pretty split, really, in the Americas.
Okay, well, as a Ferrari fan, I'm sure you're really pleased then about what's happened earlier today and obviously last weekend. So let's just look at this race then, because obviously Carlos Sainz was great in qualifying, put the car on pole position. He went and won the race, and it really was a great drive. I know he was driver of the day, and Charles Leclerc kind of benefited from this lap 10 incident, which saw a very similar incident to last weekend. And you've already sort of mentioned there that the FIA are sort of going to look into the regulations and maybe try and make it more clear. They're going to speak with the drivers. Although I'm hearing on the sort of broadcast that I watched earlier on that won't be done until after Brazil, before Qatar. And then it may not even come in until next year as well. So it's not going to be a sort of quick resolution, although I feel like pressure might make that a little bit quicker. But we have a great sort of start there from Max Verstappen. He gets ahead of Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz then gets past him on lap 9, great move from Carlos. That is him into the distance. He wins the race. But it was what happened that lap later that was the incident. And I think more interestingly that Lando Norris was ahead and then level with Max Verstappen. So to start off with, obviously, it's different to last time because Max was ahead at the apex. And that was kind of the big argument that we had last Sunday.
Yeah.
We then have a second penalty given to him for the kind of dive bomb, basically, that is how they described it on the TV commentary, certainly here in the UK. And I think that to get 2 penalties seems super harsh on Max Verstappen, bearing in mind he's had a 20-second penalty in total, where Lando's had a 5-second penalty last weekend. When you look at those two very similar, very quick incidents together, the first one was quite obvious if you look at the onboards that Lando Norris was ahead, and obviously then Max did kind of push him off the track, gained an advantage there by sort of not allowing him space and whatever. When you look at the second one, I mean, that was more reckless driving, I think you could say, because if Lando wasn't there and he'd still gone into that corner as he went into that corner, then he would have still very much gone off the track as he did. If you look at his steering, he was kind of full lock to the left, trying to work with the steering there to keep himself going. So do you think the penalty was fair? Is how I'm very long-windedly getting to this conclusion.
Yeah, it's, certainly on that second incident, as you mentioned, he outbraked himself effectively going into that corner, slid out wide. They both went off there. They deemed him that he left the track and gained an advantage, which was the second 10-second penalty that he received. I think in some ways, if I'm honest, John, I think the stewards, they had the option of 5 or 10-second penalties. They gave him 2 10s. I think a little bit of that is the stewards this weekend felt that both incidents for Mac were rather ham-fisted, and probably in some ways sending a little bit of a message. Look, Max is a very difficult guy to get around, and we've seen that throughout his career. He can be incredibly feisty, very aggressive, very difficult to get around. And in some of those cases, it's been marginal whether it's on the limit or not. And in this case, I think the stewards viewed both of them is pretty ham-fisted. Then the incident last week, they want to try to clamp down on that kind of driving. And I think they were doing 2 things. They were giving him a penalty for both those incidents, which were probably penalty worthy in some sense. And the second thing, they were sending a little bit of a message. They'd like to clamp down on that.
When you look at the response from Max, he was very much in the car. I don't know if you heard the onboard, but he was biting his tongue because we've seen what's happened recently where, he's had a lot of pressure to stop with the swearing. He saw in the press conference, and I don't know whether he's done his work of, I don't know how they described it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically community service is what we call it here in the UK.
Yeah,
don't know whether he's done that yet or not, but
No,
he's obviously biting his tongue slightly. He is going to be really angry at this decision because we know he's a competitive driver. How much do you think this will affect him going into the final 4 races, knowing that he's not had it his own way? His car isn't the fastest car anymore. I think we both agree on that. He's having to make these more aggressive moves, and he is still leading the championship by 47 points, but that's 4 races. If he has 4 stinkers, then Lando, or maybe even Charles Leclerc, could win the championship. How do you think he'll be feeling into these 4 races? Because we've not seen things like this affect him before, but there's sort of signs this time around.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, John. I think a little bit, my hunch is a little bit of what you just mentioned. He won't be happy about this at all, but I don't know that it will affect his driving. He's, whether you're a Max fan or not, the reality is he's an exceptional driver. Is he aggressive? Of course he is. All the champions are. They just are. They're aggressive drivers, some more so than others. You could certainly argue in this case that Max is frustrated. He's mad. I don't think it will impact him in total because what he's been able to do in that recalcitrant car is pretty amazing if you consider, look where Sergio Pérez is putting that car, right? And I think he is wringing the neck of what he has in order to try to win. And those years of domination by Mercedes, 8 years on the trot in the Constructors' Championship, he was there for all of them. And there was really frustrating for him. But he hung in there and he stuck it out. The thing about his frustration, some of his comments, those kind of things, Max is really in this for Max. He's not in it for fans, where Lewis tends to love that adulation. He likes that fan base, loves that connection with the fans. That's not really of interest to Max. What is interest to Max is winning championships, and he's there to win. And so I think he has that ability to have that singular focus no matter what's going on around him. Can he get rattled? Yeah, but he's typically not one to show it. I think maybe Adrian Newey said it best about him. He's an exceptional driver, and his mental capacity is well beyond just sitting in the car and getting overwhelmed by a race or emotions or anything. His ability to see beyond that is pretty exceptional too. So, yeah, I don't think it will upset him. I think if the season goes on, let's say, John, that you mentioned, maybe a DNF, maybe another penalty as he's trying to defend, all of a sudden he's chipped down to, 11, 10, 8, 17 points, something there heading in the last couple of races, then the pressure's on. And I think that would be pretty unsettling, but I don't anticipate it from him.
Yeah, I think most people will still agree that he's very much still has the advantage. He will be the 4-time in a row world champion, matching what Sebastian Vettel did with the same team. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Something else that's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next 4 races is someone you've just mentioned, Sergio Perez. Is he loved in the USA? Obviously, we know how loved he is in Mexico.
Yeah, he is. Sergio is a great driver. He's a great guy. He's just one of the nicest guys. He's a very good driver. I go back to his season debut in a Sauber at Monaco that first year in Formula One. What an amazing performance he put in. He's a terrific driver. He just, very much kind of like Daniel Ricciardo, he just can't come to grips with this car for whatever reason. And so I think the American public, they love Sergio. They think he's a great guy. They're as upset that he's, not there. Think about the Mexican Grand Prix, didn't make out of Q1, wasn't there to play tail gunner for Max. And when Max had that penalty, couldn't deny a podium for Lando Norris, which is what the team needed him to do. The reason they're in third place in the championship is that deficit of points that he hasn't been able to score all season long, which makes it difficult and a hard decision. And because he's a super good guy, super nice guy, it makes it even tougher. So yeah, I think maybe his days are numbered at Red Bull. The question is, will he see out the balance of the year? If they're fighting for Ferrari for second place in the championship, that's tens of millions of dollars that Red Bull would hate to leave on the table. So it remains to be seen. But yeah, tough times for Sergio.
Earlier in the year, when there was a lot of talk of whether Daniel Ricciardo, which now seems stupid to say, that Daniel Ricciardo would replace him after the summer break, which then didn't happen. And then Daniel Ricciardo has since been replaced by Liam Lawson, who we'll get onto in just a second. It did feel like Sergio Perez was slightly better after the summer break, but it now just seems like his form and everything has drifted away again. He has this dream of winning the Mexican Grand Prix. I've been there a couple of years, very luckily, with Formula E, and that is a fraction of what the F1 race is like. And I can see how, crazy the crowd is there. And, we saw with Pato O'Ward as well in FP1, the adulation he got from the fans there. He's very defiant, Sergio Perez, after the race, saying that he will be back next year and he will be trying to win that race next year. For you to then suggest that he may not even see out the season, it's kind of a real contrast here. It's a driver that is trying to seem very cool and calm and collected, but he must know that his days are numbered. And we saw that on lap 18. He was fighting with Liam Lawson, and they were sort of saying that Liam Lawson is probably the driver that's the favorite to take over from him next season. And it got a little bit heated. There was an incident. There was very close racing where there was a lot of kind of pushing around. And I know that's partly due to the track. It's a bit of a tricky part of the track there. But there was no penalty involved. But I've seen a video since on X. I don't know if this is real or not, but it's Liam Lawson going past Sergio Perez and flipping the bird to him. I think it's real. I have seen it in different places as well. Liam Lawson's come into this, and we will get back on Sergio Perez, but Liam Lawson has come into this opportunity. He's sat there. He knows that he can do it. He did it 4 times last year. He's come into this, and he's not exactly hanging around in being aggressive and showing that he deserves to be there. Last weekend, we had an argument with Fernando Alonso, which just seemed to go across the weekend and in the car and out of the car as well. This weekend, we have this incident with Sergio Perez, where Perez called him an idiot, and Lawson was equally complimentary on his radio as well. Sergio knows that he is probably Christian Horner and Helmut Marko's favourite to go into that car. I mean, what can he do in these last 4 races realistically? Because a lot of the talk in this country, especially, has been that Sergio is going to stay until the Mexican Grand Prix because he is basically the reason Mexican Grand Prix happens until Pato O'Ward maybe gets a chance. Yeah. He's now got nothing really left in the bank, has he, really, to stay at Red Bull?
Yeah, I think having watched F1 for as long as I have, I would say the days are numbered. I don't know that there's anything he's going to do in the last 4 races that's going to change the trajectory of his time with Red Bull. I think Red Bull are struggling with a car next year. There's not any big regulation upgrades. They've got to have a car that hits the ground running next year, and they've got to have a driver that can score points and finish at least on the tail of Max Verstappen. So I think that's the reality of it. Certainly, you mentioned Liam, pretty feisty driver. He was going at it wheel to wheel with Sergio. Unfortunately, had that incident that took his front wing off late in the race. But the reality of that is these young drivers, John, they've got one shot at this. And if you think about Oscar Piastri coming into McLaren, his job is to knock Lando's feet off the desk. Think about Lewis Hamilton coming into McLaren with Alonso. Didn't care. His job, knock Alonso's feet off the desk, which he did, right? Sebastian Vettel had no interest in playing wet nurse to Mark Webber, knocked his feet off the desk. These are what champions do. This is their time, and they have to make the most of it. So, you see a little bit of that with George, with Lewis, but I would argue maybe not enough. So yeah, it will be interesting when Charles Leclerc came to Ferrari, had those altercations with Sebastian. His job, knocked the feet off the desk, right? So I think in this case, that's what Liam's trying to do. He's not about to pull over for Sergio. That's the seat he wants next year. And so he wants to make a point, and he did so.
Say that does happen then. Say that for some crazy reason they say, look, Liam Lawson is going to get the opportunity in the Red Bull over Yuki Tsunoda. Obviously, Yuki had a very short race indeed, didn't even make the first corner. That contact with Alex Albon that also took Alex Albon out of the race. Say that it was Liam Lawson that got that opportunity, and actually it happened this year, and they still have Sergio Pérez under contract for next year, and that switch is made. Do they keep Sergio Pérez alongside Yuki Tsunoda, or is that Sergio Pérez out of the sport unless another team wants to take a punt on him in 2026?
Well, it's a great question, and I would think just, logically from a team perspective, if you wanted to make a run to retain second place in the Constructors Championship, you've got to have that other car. You got to have both cars scoring points. And if you wanted to make that change and move Liam to that car, then move Sergio back to RB, I think that's a logical choice. I would question Sergio's driver contract that he has, whether that's allowed within the contract to move him out of that seat. These contracts can be pretty complex. There's escape clauses for both teams and drivers. There's clauses about if that car is running over a weekend, he has to be in that seat. It just depends on what that contract would look like and whether they can just swap drivers back and forth like that. They may not have that opportunity. And if they don't, then he'll see out the balance of the year. But if they can and are allowed to swap that has to be a consideration for Christian Horner and team at this point if they want to retain second place in the championship.
Yeah, we heard from David Dicker, who is the founder of Rodin Motorsport, on our YouTube channel last week, so talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. And he is the guy that's basically backed Liam Lawson since he was very, very young. He's an Australian who's backing a Kiwi driver, billionaire, got all the money ever. And, he was saying to me in our chat that he didn't think that Ricciardo should have been in that seat at all this year and that Liam should have been in it. And he was very blunt in thinking that Liam should be in that second seat. So you can go and check that out if you like the sound of what David
I actually
Dicker has
argued that. I argued that at before this season started. I said Liam should have been in one of the RB cars, whether it was Yuki sat down or Dan, either one, but Liam should have been in that car all season long. And yeah, that's what I said at the end of last year in our preseason coming into this year. I felt like that's actually the choice they should have made, but they didn't.
And if there is a driver swap this season at Red
for whatever
Bull, it
reason,
would make sense with Liam because he's already shown us that he's up and around the points and more consistent, where Sergio's having his struggles. And, maybe it's got into his head or whatever. But there's also Franco Colapinto, and this is getting us on to Williams now. Williams are in an interesting position because I think that actually, out of all the drivers available to them, Alex Albon is the weakest driver. And I know that he's got more experience than Franco Colapinto, but just watching him race in junior series and watching him get his F1 opportunity, and as you say, come in there like a junior driver should, elbows out, not making any friends there, and just getting results straight away. That shows real talent. He could even be someone that Red Bull might think, okay, if we move Liam or we move Yuki up to be in that Red Bull seat and Sergio moves aside completely, Franco Colapinto isn't on the grid at the moment. Sauber's the only seat left available. I'm sure he's being considered for that, along with Valtteri and maybe Mick Schumacher, if that's still part of the conversation. But you would think if you're Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, getting this young, incredible driver, whether Williams will allow it, into your team is surely an attractive proposition.
Yeah, it would be. I think Franco, here's a guy that, this is his shot, right? He's got this one chance, and unfortunately there's no room at the end for him at Williams next year. I would think if he doesn't get a ride next year in another team, that Alex is very much under pressure. If he's not delivering, because Carlos Sainz will be there, and Carlos will. So I think Alex very much under pressure, and Alex has had kind of a spate of bad luck here in the last few races. But Alex has also done some pretty amazing things. And I really do rate Alex quite highly. But I think the Colapinto thing is interesting. Over the balance of this weekend, James was asked if he had been talking to Helmut Marko about a potential ride, and he wouldn't comment on it. The thing about RB, I think that would be a great place for him. Technically, in my personal opinion, I feel like going into next year, RB really has two seats open, in my opinion. I think Yuki's had long enough to prove himself. If they're not going to take that and move him to Red Bull, I think he's been there long enough to prove himself. I think RB and Red Bull in particular would be interested in Colapinto if they didn't feel like they had enough talent in their junior drivers. If their junior drivers they felt really strongly about, then maybe keeping Yuki for, that sort of, continuity would be good, and bring in one of their junior drivers. But if Colapinto went to RB, ultimately he's still a Williams driver. So would RB be interested in fine tuning and improving the pace and letting Colapinto see behind the curtain, only to know that he's really a Williams driver? I don't know if that's Red Bull speed, but they might if they didn't feel their junior program was strong enough yet.
Well, I've heard rumors that Tsunoda could be going to Aston Martin at some point soon, due to the sort of the Honda thing and being a Japanese driver. So whether or not there's any truth in that, who knows? Aston Martin is where we can bring this conversation to an end, and that is obviously Fernando Alonso racing in his 400th race.
Yeah.
I mean, his name was on the track I saw there in the grandstand section, and we've had a lot of focus on him. I know he was ill at the start of the week. Speculation was that he just didn't fancy doing all the media because that's Fernando Alonso, but who knows? When you look at his race weekend, it was meant to be a huge celebration. It ended very abruptly with him retiring on lap 16 with that car having an overheating problem. They thought maybe there was something stuck in one of the side pods. But for him, it's a real shame. But what do you make of his comments that he expects to be around for another 50 races? Because I guess he's assuming 2 seasons, 48 races, another 4 races. So that's 52 races. A driver doing 452 races in F1, considering he's took a sidestep for a while, is quite incredible, isn't it, really?
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. He's one of the best F1 drivers that's been on that grid. There's no doubt about it. And he still has that fire. If that car is thereabouts, he's worth several tenths in it, and he's going to put that car in a position that it really has no interest in being in, and he'll do it. He's an incredible driver. 400, I don't know. I was doing some rude math. I think of the 782 drivers Formula One's had, he's driven against like 15% of those. He's been around for that long. So it's an amazing stat, but he's still an amazing driver. He certainly understands the car setup, what he brings to that team just beyond his ability to drive, I think is incredible. And with Adrian Newey coming there, it'll take time for Adrian's sort of intellectual property and gray matter to permeate that team and permeate that car. But I think it would be a great opportunity for him to finish with over 450 races. It'd be amazing.
And of course, if he finishes, there's potential for Max Verstappen, maybe once Adrian's got his, his pencil to work at Aston Martin up at Silverstone, then maybe there's talk of Max Verstappen might be open to it, may even be open to it a bit sooner. Imagine a Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen partnership, even next year. That would be 6 world championships together. That would be pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I've got to ask...
also, John, I would also argue that Aston Martin with Adrian coming on, you have Fernando, a veteran there. I heard some talk about I wouldn't do that at all. If I was Aston Martin, I would pick up George Russell,
right?
Because Mercedes and Toto seem all in on Kimi Antonelli. They're showering him with love. They're all, Toto's so excited, you can hear it in his voice. But when he talks about George, it's kind of. And if George isn't feeling the love from Mercedes, I think George should go to Aston with Fernando and Adrian. I think it'd be a brilliant move.
Yeah, it'd be good to have a British driver as well.
Absolutely.
Given that it's, they've got this new base at Silverstone, which is super impressive.
Yeah.
I'm going to end this now because you've told me that you're a Ferrari fan. So I haven't asked you yet personally what you make of the big Lewis Hamilton move next year. He must be licking his lips right now because when it was announced, Ferrari weren't exactly performing. But now, while he's getting as much as he possibly can out of that Mercedes, he's watching Charles and he's watching Carlos win races in a Ferrari that isn't going to change much next year. So he's actually, for the second time in his career, potentially timed this incredibly well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And my thought on that is exactly the same, John. I think when we talk about all the wonderful things that Lewis does, his incredible driving, he's got a great flair he loves the fashion and he does a lot of things really well, does Lewis, right? But I would argue one of the greatest things he does is he just has that ability. It must be a magic ball or a crystal ball, but he comes into the team exactly at the right time. He entered Formula One at McLaren just exactly at the right time. When he left McLaren, a lot of people are scratching their head because they were watching Schumacher and Rosberg struggle over there at Mercedes trying to develop that car. And they're like, what is he doing? He hit Mercedes 8 world championships, right? And then a lot of people say, why is Lewis leaving Mercedes? They can bull it back. They're brilliant men and women at Mercedes. They know what they're doing. Why would he leave and go to Ferrari? Ferrari's had all these issues. Their strategies in the bin. What are they thinking? He's timing it perfectly again. And it's a great on Lewis because that is not easy. And I would offer as a juxtaposition of what I'm saying, look at Fernando's career. Just seems to miss that rise, and Lewis just seems to get it right. So yeah, if Ferrari seems to come on song, and I don't see the regulations changing next year, and Ferrari can keep that development and evolution going with next year's car, Lewis could be in the catbird seat.
It's going to be remarkable to see him if he turns up and speaks fluent Italian as well, which I'm not ruling out. I feel, right. I reckon he's been slyly doing it. We've not heard any hints of it, and he'll just go in day one and he's speaking proper Italian. We obviously have Brazil coming up this weekend. Weirdly, I was going to look at going to these 3 races, and I thought, well, Mexico to Brazil is not too far, because I was planning on driving from Austin to Mexico, which people warn me against, because apparently driving through some parts of Mexico, don't do that. But Brazil is quite a long way from Mexico. The altitude is obviously something that in Mexico the drivers have had to deal with. Brazil, quite humid. What are you expecting this weekend? Do you think we're going to see more Ferrari dominance, or do you think that maybe the Red Bulls can, do something in the meantime to work out how to get that car a bit faster?
Yeah, just to be honest and tell on myself, Austin, I think was great for Ferrari, certainly. I really kind of felt that going to Mexico, they may struggle a little bit. The Ferraris, it's what is it, 2,200 meters above sea level. Over here, John, we're still on something we like to call the British Imperial System. You may have heard of it. So it's about 7,200 feet above sea level, and I really, it's a 20% reduction in air pressure. Oxygen is on rare forms. So I really kind of thought that they may struggle a little bit more keeping those brakes cool, that engine cool in the Ferrari, and that I was proven wrong. It would not surprise me if they went to Brazil and they were equally as strong there. And it really could come down to a McLaren Ferrari battle at Sao Paulo, because it's kind of shaping up that way. And in the latter part of the Mexico Grand Prix, certainly Lando in that long run form seemed every bit as fast as Carlos and Charles. So it could end up being a battle. And You never know. I think Red Bull's certainly on the back foot.
Yeah, we have a 29-point gap then, don't we, between McLaren and Ferrari for the Constructors' Championship, which is often overlooked. But as you say, that's where the money is. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out. I can guarantee you the altitude in Mexico City does not agree with my very British altitude sensors. Every time I go there, I get the nosebleeds, I get the lightheadedness.
Dehydrated.
So when Charles Leclerc was sort of complaining at one point that he couldn't get his water working, they were joking about it on the TV, and I was like, no, I can fully understand why that's important. But yeah,
Absolutely.
looking forward to Brazil. Always a good race at Interlagos. Todd, I'm going to let you shamelessly sell whatever you want to right now, which I presume is the parcferme.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me on the show. I really do appreciate it. The honor is all mine. Certainly, we've been podcasting and talking and writing about Formula One for 17 years now at the Parc Fermé, theparcferme.com. That's the name of the podcast as well. We're on episode 909. I've done 80 special interview podcasts on top of that. Millions of downloads. We're global, and we've been doing it a long time. I've worked with Ferrari and Red Bull and Shell and everybody in the paddock. I've been to many of the races over the years. I've been to Ferrari's headquarters over the years, and we love it. And one of my co-hosts, John, is Paul. Paul is the sporting manager for the Aston Martin Heart of Racing team here in IMSA, and his team and Ian James will be running both Valkyries at Le Mans next year. So,
nice.
So he's a real professional thing. He's a real race car driver. So I'm not. So I went out and befriended one. But yeah, I would love to promote the podcast for sure at theparcferme.com.
Awesome stuff. And I know that obviously you speak with Paul Ross quite a lot on talkSPORT as well.
I do.
Nights after the race and sometimes with Martin across the weekend as well. So
Yes.
I think it's always good to get a perspective from somewhere else in the world. And obviously we have Las Vegas coming up very soon. So hopefully we can speak again maybe before and after that. And are you going to make your way out to Vegas, or is that a bit too chaotic for you?
It's a little chaotic and it's a little expensive. I think I'll wait for all the hype to slow down. I love Austin. I've been there many times, but eventually I'm sure I'll make it to Vegas.
Okay, one day soon. In the meantime, you can maybe drive it on the computer game or something like that. So you feel like you're not only there, but also you are a real driver, Todd. Thank you very much for joining me. Check out theparcferme.com and, of course, Todd's podcast as well. And check out On Track, our weekly motorsport show here on talkSPORT. New episodes, as I said at the start of this show, every Tuesday from 2 p.m. live on talkSPORT 2. And we've also got the brand new talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel where you can go and watch chats with Oscar Piastri. And we've got some more coming up as well with the start of the Formula E season very, very soon with Nick De Vries on the way this week. You can check out that as a podcast as well. Just make sure you just type in On Track talkSPORT into whichever podcast app you've got. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit subscribe. See you next time.